Hello, hello. I'm a bit hidden. Let me sit right here. Welcome, welcome to another MSI Insider live stream. And as you can see, I'm not here alone. I'm here with the one, the only...
Ruudt.
Welcome, welcome, Ruudt. Yeah. For our returning viewers, if Ruudt is here, you all know that it's going to be a bit more technical, because today we're going to talk about one of our new motherboards. Maybe you can already show it a bit, Ruudt.
It's the PRO A620M-E.
Yes,
that's
and this
the one.
is the most affordable AM5 motherboard in our lineup currently. So we already had X670 and X670E, of course, and B650, and now we're also adding the A620 chipset to our portfolio. I see a question in chat. Voice. You should be able to hear us. And with this board, the whole platform becomes accessible to more people. Of course, AM5 always was relatively expensive, especially if you were used to AM4, for example, but also compared to the cheaper Intel chipsets. And this way, it also becomes more affordable to build an AM5 rig. Of course, you have to do some concessions with this chipset and with this motherboard as well. So that's something we're going to talk about today. And Ruudt is going to do a lot of demonstrations, benchmarks. You've got some different CPUs, right?
Yeah, I also have different CPUs to show you what it can do and what it can't do. So yeah, hopefully we can demo some stuff.
Yeah, would be nice. Let's first dive a little bit into the theory. I'll try to keep it short, not to make it too boring. So first, quick comparison between AM4 and AM5. Of course, AM4, the previous AMD platform, and they actually ran a lot of different CPUs on this platform. So all the way from the first generation Zen, Zen 2, Zen 2 Plus, Zen 3 is all AM4, all the same socket. So they also had many different chipsets over those generations. The 300 series, 400 series, 500 series. They used to have a PGA socket, basically meaning the pins are in the CPU and that enters your socket. Now with AM5, AMD moves to an LGA socket, and we already know that from Intel, but also the AMD Threadripper CPUs already use this. It says no audio. That's
still a lot of people, and I see it's mostly YouTube that is complaining.
Yeah, it's weird because it does seem like the audio is here. Twitch also, people, can you hear us?
And is it my voice that is not working?
Yes, okay.
Twitch is fine.
I'm not sure. I know Eric is joining as well. Maybe he can fix this in the background. But it seems like, I see some responses on YouTube now as well that audio is fine.
Okay.
Maybe check if the player enables audio.
Okay, good.
But let's continue.
Okay.
So we're talking about LGA, and LGA basically means that the pins are not in the CPU, but they're in the socket. Also meaning that the socket becomes a bit more vulnerable, so always be very careful with an LGA socket. But it also has its benefits, because Ruudt, I'm sure you're familiar with this as well, but if you have a cooler and it vacuums on an AM4, yeah, then you basically drag it with cooler and CPU out of your socket, and that's of course something you don't want. You don't have that problem anymore with AM5 because there's basically a bracket locking the CPU on your motherboard. Memory, AMD transitioned from DDR4 to DDR5 when transferring from AM4 to AM5. So that's different than what we know from Intel. With Intel, they actually have dual memory controllers in the Alder Lake and the Raptor Lake CPUs, so 12th generation and 13th generation, and then based upon the motherboard you buy, it's either DDR4 or DDR5, but you can pick what memory you want. For AMD, they transition completely platform to platform. So AM4 is DDR4 memory, AM5 is DDR5. Also with A620, so this is a more affordable motherboard, but still the only memory you can run on this is DDR5, and that has to do with the fact that there are only DDR5 memory controllers in AMD Ryzen 7000 CPUs. I see Anime Variant says, sorry bro, maybe my mistake. But good that it works now. CPU support, so all the previous Ryzen models were all AM4, and the Ryzen 7000 series is like the first Ryzen non-Threadripper CPU that runs in AM5. And these are also 5 nanometer CPUs for the CCDs at least. The I/O chip is 6 nanometer, right, Ruudt?
Huh.
The I/O die? I believe
question.
so.
I have no idea.
And that was 7 nanometer for the Ryzen 5000 series. The older Ryzens were older processors as well, so 12 nanometer or 14 nanometer. And it's still up to 16 cores. We already had that on AM4. That hasn't changed for AM5. So that's the platform. Then let's take a look at our AM5 lineup, because of course we already have many models in our lineup, both on X670 and B650. In our MEG segment, we have the top-end models, the enthusiast segment. So we have Godlike and Ace, both of those are X670E boards. Then in MPG, we have Carbon for both X670E and B650. We also have 2 Edge models, 1 ATX, 1 Mini ITX. In the MAG segment, there is 1 X670E model, that's Tomahawk Wi-Fi. And then on B650, there's Tomahawk, Mortar Wi-Fi, and Mortar. And the Mortar models are Micro ATX. And then in our Pro series, there's 1 X670 board, the X670-P Wi-Fi. So that's a non-E model, so the non-extreme model. Then there are a couple of B650 models. So in ATX, there is the B650-P Wi-Fi. In Micro ATX, there is the B650M-A Wi-Fi and a non-Wi-Fi version. And now we're adding the PRO A620M-E also within the Pro series. Then let's take a look at what we offer in this A620 segment. And basically, this is the most affordable option for a 65 watt AM5 processor. This also means that this motherboard is not made for example, X-series processors. As they have a higher TDP, you will bottleneck them a bit with this motherboard. Later on, we'll also demonstrate this, and you see how much you will lose if you run it on this motherboard that runs certain power limits, because the VRM is more limited than higher-end motherboards, compared to those higher-end motherboards that can fully unlock the potential of those processors. It has a 4-layer PCB with thickened 2-ounce thickened copper. That also helps with the cooling. There is no additional heatsink on the VRM, so that will cool through the PCB in this situation. The VRM design is a 6+2 phase direct VRM design. It has some nice features for DIY users, so easy debug LED, Froster AI cooling support, and you can also connect RGB lighting through the header on the motherboard through Mystic Light extension. It offers dual display outputs, HDMI 2.1 and VGA. Maybe let's quickly show the I/O a bit.
Oh, you want to use that one?
Yeah, we can use this one.
So the I/O is...
Yeah, so it has HDMI 2.1 on the far left, and then there is a VGA output as well. So if you have an older monitor, you can still connect it to this motherboard as well.
There's also an invisible PS2 mouse.
An invisible one?
Yeah, because
it's green, yeah. Also the audio connector, that of course has to do with our green screen, our chroma keying.
No one, yeah. It's cool that it's invisible.
Jack Meow says in Twitch chat, are you planning to unlock wattage for higher TDP on low-end boards? That wouldn't be wise to do so, because the VRM on this motherboard is rated to run certain processors. If we would unlock it and, for example, a Ryzen 9 would draw more power, you will overheat your VRM. So that's definitely not recommended. If you want to go for a higher-end CPU, get a higher-end board that also matches with the power consumption of that higher-end CPU. This is not made, for example, for Ryzen 9 processors, especially not the X models. And of course, there is support for MSI Center software. It also comes with the MSI version of AIDA 64 and a trial version of Norton 360 for gamers. Then let's take a more detailed look at the motherboard. So we already talked a bit about the VRM. So it's a direct 6+2 phase P-pack. That also means that you, for example, can identify the separate MOSFETs. So you don't have a power stage that includes both the high side and low side MOSFETs. You have individual chips. Maybe Ruudt, you can point at them a bit.
So these are the low side MOSFETs and these are the high side MOSFETs.
Yeah. So on higher end boards you have power stages and then they're integrated in one chip, and here they're separate chips.
Actually, I think it's the other way around. The other ones are getting hotter, so that should be the low side one.
Yeah, I think the high side are on the left and the low side on the right from this angle.
Yeah, high side left,
Yeah.
definitely.
It has Lightning Gen 4 PCI Express. Of course, if you get other models, you may have PCI Express 5 on that slot, but for A620 it's a 4 slot. It has steel armor reinforcement, so let's quickly take a look at that as well. So this is where you would put your graphics card. And as of today, still all graphics card, even the most high-end ones, are still PCI Express Gen 4. So at this point you don't lose anything on that slot for current VGA cards. There is also an M.2 slot, also Gen 4. It's a lower end model, so no M.2 shield frozzer for this one, which you will obviously see on our B650 models, for example. Even the more entry-level ones have an M.2 shield frozzer there. Here it's just the bare slot. Keep that in mind if you're picking an SSD. So if you're running a higher end SSD that produces quite a lot of heat and it doesn't have its own heatsink, that can become an issue. Of course, also depends on airflow and all those kind of factors. But maybe look into an SSD that already has one, or an SSD that has somewhat lower power consumption that doesn't run very hot for that. 2-ounce thickened copper PCB, of course, helps with the cooling of the VRM, and the Mystic Light extension header. So that's the J RGB header.
Yeah.
And I think it's in the bottom left, if I'm correct.
Over here.
Yeah. So this is the, it's not an addressable one, this is the 12-volt one, not the 5-volt one. So make sure also to use it with 12-volt RGB components like LED strips or fans or other things. But they're not interchangeable, so make sure not to combine this with an addressable RGB header. Then let's take a bit of a look at the CPUs that are currently available within the Ryzen 7000 series, because as we mentioned before, this motherboard is not meant for all of them. Basically, the official support for this board are the 65-watt processors within the Ryzen 7000 series. So those are, at this point at least, we never know what AMD will launch in the future, but at this point it's the Ryzen 5 7600, it's the Ryzen 7 7700, and the Ryzen 9 7900. And those have 6, 8, and 12 cores respectively, and simultaneous multi-threading, so you will get double the threads that you have in cores. The 65-watt, especially on the 7600, well, it doesn't really limit them that much compared to the 7600X. Of course, once you go higher, more cores draw more power, so you will see a bigger difference the higher you go, because you will run into more power limits as you have a lot of cores and they all require power. Yeah, so there are the other CPUs, they are supported. Like technically, through BIOS support, you can pop any of these CPUs on this list in. They are supported, but they will not always will not always get the most performance out of them on this motherboard when you would compare it to one of the higher end motherboards. Later on, Ruudt has done some testing as well versus the B650 Tomahawk, who will show you a couple of different CPUs that he tested and how much you can expect to lose. And we will also run some live demos so you can see what the differences are there. The cool thing about these 65-watt CPUs is that they actually come with a boxed cooler, if you get the boxed version of the CPU, of course. That's not the case with the X series, because AMD expects with the X series you're going for higher end cooling to properly cool these CPUs, also because of their TDP value, and that will very often, for example, be an all-in-one liquid cooler. For these 65-watt CPUs, it's of course fine to run them with an air cooler, and they come bundled in the box. For the Ryzen 5, that is the AMD Wraith Stealth, and for the Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 9 7700 and 7900, it's the AMD Wraith Prism. And Ruudt, I think you tested both, right?
Yeah, I tested both, because the Wraith Prism is definitely a much better cooler, so it will cool CPUs much lower temperature than the Stealth. The Stealth is really basic. Only aluminum, and the other one has some heat pipes and copper on it as well. So that's actually a pretty decent cooler, the Prism one. Yeah,
so the nice thing about this is that it's also the same cooler that you'll have on AM4. So maybe you still have a Wraith Prism cooler from a previous system, or maybe a friend has one laying around because they got it with the CPU and they're using a different cooler. You can actually use that cooler on an AM5 motherboard as well. It's not that there is a difference between the AM5 and the AM4 model. So if you have one of those coolers and you're, for example, going for a Ryzen 5 7600, you can just use that Wraith Prism AM4 cooler on this motherboard as well. They use the same clips. I see some questions in chat. Kawasaki Gamers asking, can you use the 79 or a 7800 X3D only for gaming? No, it also runs fine in other applications. It is slightly less powerful than non-3D CPUs usually, and that's because they're clocked slightly lower. But the latency is a lot better, which makes them a lot better for gaming. I'm not sure with the Ryzen 7, Ruudt, maybe you know, compared to the 7700X. I'm not sure if it's clocked that much lower because it's 7800 compared to 7700. But if you look at the Ryzen 9, for example.
If you compare it in all-core workloads like Cinebench or video transcoding or stuff like that, then the 7700X is usually a little bit faster, but it's very small difference, so not huge. No.
Is this DDR4 or DDR5? This is all DDR5. Ryzen 7000 series only have a DDR5 memory controller in the CPU, so we can also not make any DDR4 boards on AM5. It's simply not supported. So everything on AM5 is by default, no matter what kind of chipset you have, it's always DDR5. Let me see if there...
Ryzen 5 7600X will pull over 130 watts, so the box cooler not going to cut it. That's true. The non-X is a 65 watt part, so on this board it will be limited to 65 watt TDP.
Also, the 7600X doesn't come with a box cooler, right?
No,
it's an X series model.
But for the 7600X, you can still use the Prism cooler because that you can work with that normally. I think up to 100, 120 watts should be okay for the Prism cooler.
Yeah.
More or less, yeah.
I see some people already talking about, of course, some issues popped up with certain AMD CPUs that, well, basically part of the CPU melted and was all swollen up and some of the sockets burst through. And AMD is currently, of course, looking at this. There are some different messages around what the cause is. I think, Ruudt, you also have a theory, right?
Yeah, well, especially because Gamers Nexus, they released a video that they reproduced at least the result. So they were able to burn a CPU that was actually melting. So kudos for that, for them, that they can even achieve that, because we haven't seen any CPUs melting or burning or dying so far on AM5, which is a good thing. But there is something going on, and there's a lot of guessing around on the internet, but I think only AMD can really investigate this properly, I think. And maybe it has something to do with the voltages and with the protection mechanisms inside the CPU, or mandatory by bias, but at the moment I'm not sure. The Gamers Nexus video pointed at least one issue or one cause to the Asus board, but not sure if that's really the overcurrent protection didn't work, but I believe the CPU was already dead before that happened. So my theory was that because they ran the CPU for a longer time without booting in the socket without a cooler on it, and maybe it's mechanical or something, so there's no cooler putting pressure on it, that might have caused some issue there. And later they burned it when they put with a hand the water block of a water cooler on the CPU and then started it up. So maybe mechanical pressure has something to do with it, maybe not. It's just a guess, it's just a theory, but yeah.
So at this point, still uncertain what the actual cause is. At least, luckily, we haven't seen it on our boards yet, and we hope it stays like that. But we can never exclude. We also have to wait for the conclusion from AMD's side to see what the actual root cause of the problem is. But so far, we haven't been seeing it on our boards, luckily.
And basically, AMD is plugging the hole by just mandatorily we set the SoC voltage to 1.3 max and enforcing that to all motherboard vendors. So I think that's the quick fix for now. Yeah, somebody's saying a GISA 1007 is also on the way. That's true, but we don't have BIOSes yet that implement that one. We're currently at 1006 with SoC voltage limited to 1.3. I personally don't believe that the SoC voltage is the one causing this. I think there's something else going on.
Zyfon's asking a quick question. I have an MSI MEG Z690 Wi-Fi DDR4, I'm missing an antenna. Can I get them from MSI? We don't sell them separately, but I think they're quite interchangeable to our antennas. So if you happen to have like an old network card with some antennas you can take off, or I think maybe from other brands you have them separately, because they basically use the same connection point, the one that you twist on. So no, we don't sell them separately, but you should be able to find them.
Yeah, I think you can also buy them online.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Jack Meow says, will AMD still make Athlon CPUs, or they ended that era with AM4? I honestly don't know. We have to wait. What else AMD will bring to AM5? Of course, it's still a very recent platform, and commonly they start with the higher end models first, and slowly they work towards lower end. So for example, they started with the X series, and later on the non-X series. In the past, of course, with AM4 we also saw Ryzen 3. We don't have those currently on AM5, but maybe they will be there as well in the future, and of course that will be a very logical combination as well with A620. But yeah, it remains to be seen what AMD will launch exactly on AM5. But one thing we know for sure is that they will definitely expand their portfolio on AM5, because they're also planning on using AM5 for the foreseeable future. So definitely expect more CPUs from AMD side on AM5. Becooked on Twitch, I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, but does the graphics card RX 6650 XT fit this motherboard? That's a very good example that you use the 6600 or the 6650 XT, because that's the card we're actually using today for these demonstrations.
Yeah, we're going to use that one.
Yeah. So yes, fits perfectly fine, no issues. Okay, let's continue, because of course we are mentioning it's affordable, but now you're of course curious, what is the price of this motherboard? And it's priced at $85 US excluding VAT, or 97 euros including VAT. Especially the euro price is a little bit variable because VAT differs per country. I believe this was calculated with 20% VAT, so depending on the region where you are, the price may be slightly higher or lower. And this is just a price indication, because we have a recommended price, but resellers are still free to define their own prices of the products in the store. But this is a bit what you can expect in terms of pricing. So this is by quite a big margin the cheapest board in our lineup. So if you want to build a more affordable AM5 system and you're not running an extremely high-end CPU, then this may be a nice choice for you. Sarge_T says that's pretty cheap. Yeah, I think compared to the current AM5 lineup, it's definitely affordable. And also the great thing now is, because when AM5 launched, DDR5 was still quite expensive. So it was adding the price on the price. The AM5 motherboards were relatively expensive because you could only get the more high-end chipsets. And the DDR5 was still quite expensive. DDR5 has decreased a lot in terms of pricing. Later on I will show you a pricing overview of what you can expect if you build a full system, what kind of pricing you can expect. But it's a big difference compared to what it was, and now it is actually extremely close to DDR4. And also the higher speeds of DDR5, so if you're looking at like 5600, 6000 are extremely affordable now. It's only the extremely high speeds that are still expensive, but especially on AMD, the benefit is quite limited, and that also has to do with the infinity fabric of the CPU. So yeah, DDR5 is now a very viable option for the more entry-level systems as well.
Also very hard to achieve higher memory frequency on AM5 at the moment. So
yeah, definitely true.
Maybe later generations will increase that.
And the performance seems to respond better on slightly lower frequencies but much better timing. So for example, DDR5 6000 CL30 is, for example, a very nice kit. Of course, that's a somewhat higher end kit, but performs very well with AMD, better than if you would get a higher frequency, higher latency one. FatDog says VGA, so I could play on an old CRT. Yes, you can. Or an old LCD if it has a VGA. Of course, you also get a digital output. It actually has HDMI 2.1, so there's your recent standard as well. If you're using the integrated graphics, of course, you can also decide to use a graphics card and use those display outputs. But we decided to go for both a digital and an analog output. LNJT says $80 US will be about 140 Australian dollars with tax. That could be. I'm not sure about the current value of the Australian dollar compared to the US dollar. High Demon 79 says, how can we get more than one M.2 SSD working on this board? You could buy an add-in card that supports it, but of course that will require your PCI Express slot. So by default, the board of course has only one M.2 slot. You can still connect additional SSDs through SATA, for example, or hard drives. But if you really want more M.2 SSDs, you either have to go for a higher end motherboard, like for example one of our B650 models, or put in an add-in card. So if you're using the integrated graphics and you don't need that PCI Express slot, then you can do that as well.
Yeah, but this board is really for the simple boxes without too much expansion, right?
Yeah, this is like really focusing on the basics, also to achieve this price. Because if you add that second M.2 slot, if you add more DIMM slots, because it has only two DIMMs for memory, you cannot put 4 DIMMs in there. If you add all those kind of things, then it will add up the price, and then you will eventually still get very close to the B650 price. And we really want this to be more affordable, also that you have something to choose from.
If you need to buy like an add-in card for the extra M.2, then just buy the B650, because
that may be the cheaper option, and you will also get some more benefits. You will get a stronger VRM, you will get more DIMM slots. But maybe you have one of those cards laying around, then of course the story will be different.
The sole purpose of this board is to be affordable. That's the key. That's the key.
Kawasaki Gamer is asking, can you still have negative offset clock on A620 and voltage control? Ruudt, you tested with this.
Yeah, voltage control, you do have offset voltage control. So if you want to undervolt, that's definitely possible. Overvolt I haven't tried, since it's limited by power. So this board is locked by 88 watts of PPT power. That's basically the same as the power limits on an Intel board. And you cannot set it any higher. The funny part is you cannot even set it lower, because there are some TDP and PPT limits in the BIOS, but they don't seem to work at the moment. So it's actually hard locked, or I'm not sure if it's hard locked or BIOS locked or whatever, but at least you cannot change it. So if you add more voltage to it, it means you can have less current and also less performance, so the clocks will be lower. So lowering the voltage would increase your current and probably maybe squeeze a little bit more of frequency out of it. That's possible, but with my limited testing on a 7600, it didn't matter that much. I didn't get a lot of extra performance. Actually, it was almost zero. So I stopped doing that. But I didn't try it much because I was too much focused on the cooling part of the whole thing. So I spent most of my testing there.
Dutch guy is asking, but can it run Crysis? Depending on the graphics card you put in there.
Yeah, the 6650 XT should run Crysis.
I'm not sure about integrated graphics. Like maybe the first Crysis should be okay, but the newer Crysises.
The integrated graphics on these CPUs are
It's basic. It's basically for just giving you an image. So if you don't do any gaming, then it can be. It's okay for browsing. It's okay for watching a video.
Yeah, Solitary. That should be a game that's capable.
Yeah, that should be fine.
That should be fine.
Okay, let's go a bit into example systems. So of builds that you could do with this motherboard, and that would also still somewhat make sense. So let's start off with a bang for the buck AM5 gaming system. So these are prices in US dollars. I just looked this up this morning. So I checked a couple of prices on like Amazon and Newegg and some more stores. And this is about what you can expect. If you're going for a Ryzen 5 7600, which in our opinion is the most logical combination with this motherboard, you can currently get it for $210 US. The memory, you can get a very nice 32 gigabyte DDR5 6000 kit for only $100 now. So that's a big difference compared to, for example, 1 year ago, because DDR5 used to be way more expensive, but prices have really come down a lot. And also DDR5 6000 runs perfectly fine on A620. So very nice combination. It of course also doesn't bottleneck your CPU. If you can get a good deal on, for example, a 5600 kit, can also be fine, especially if the 5600 kit maybe has slightly lower timings than the 6000 kit. The kit we're using today is DDR5 6000 CL36, I believe, Ruudt?
36, yeah.
Yeah.
With an Expo.
And that's an AMD Expo kit.
Yep.
Of course, we would recommend for this, go for AMD Expo. It can run XMP profiles as well. But if you're going to buy a set anyway and you're going for AMD, just go for Expo by default. Dutch guy says $100 for DDR5 6000. Yes, it really came down a lot in the past 6 months, I think, Ruudt, approximately.
Yeah, I think
when it had like the biggest dive in terms of pricing.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And of course, it depends per kit. If you get a kit with RGB lighting, it will be slightly more expensive. If you want a 6000 kit CL30, it will be more expensive than when you get CL36, 38, or even 40. So you still have a lot of options there, but you can already find a DDR5 6000 kit for $100 US. Then a motherboard, of course, priced at $85. GPU, so we thought it was a logical combination to combine this with an RX 6650 XT. Here in the list is the Mac model. It's a bit more affordable. We didn't have one on hand, so we went with the gaming model. But yeah, it's up to you, of course, what you want. You can also put a higher end graphics card in it. It will run perfectly fine. You can even put a 4090 in here, but probably if you're going for a 4090, you're going for higher end components in general. But we think a 6650 XT is reasonably priced and a nice combination, for example, with the Ryzen 5. SSD, 1 terabyte Spatium M450 SSD. That's actually PCI Express Gen 4 SSD, and the motherboard also supports PCI Express Gen 4. You can already get it for $60 US nowadays. So also SSD pricing came down quite a lot in the past year. For the PSU, we went with the MSI A550BN. That's a 550 watt power supply. That's perfectly enough for the Ryzen 5 7600 in combination with that 6650 XT. And the case is the Forge M100A. We're actually also using a Forge M100 case. This is the R model. That's the one we had here. That one is $10 US more expensive. But if you go with the A, you can already go for $49. And it supports auto RGB as well. So you get a nice combination of a total $838 or $39 US, and then you have a nice bang for the buck AM5 gaming system. Davina Duckworth is asking, any Thunderbolt boards for A620? No, that's really a higher end feature that we don't expect to bring to A620, also not in the future. These are really more affordable motherboards, focusing at the essentials. So more kind of luxury options like Thunderbolt, you will not find on these entry-level motherboards. Dutch guy says, damn, g.skill 6000 CL30 is €175 for me. That has to do with the very tight latency of that kit.
Yeah.
6000 CL30 is high-end DDR5 memory. It is very well with AMD, but it's definitely more expensive, so it's probably more logical that you would combine a kit like that with a higher end AMD CPU. Gaming Junction BD says, I think 3060 Ti is okay for a budget build. Intel Arc A770 also good for. Yeah, you definitely have more options here. This is just an example VGA that we put in here, but you can basically put any graphics card that you want in this board. Even a very high-end one, a very entry-level one. You will not bottleneck anything because it supports PCI Express 4.0 times 16. And basically, there are no graphics cards on the market right now that support more bandwidth than this board can offer on the PCI Express slot. So you can go in any direction you want, but in terms of pricing, we thought this 6650 XT was a logical combination.
Yeah, it's good value. So,
yeah. So that's also the one we picked for our demonstrations in today's live stream. Then this is of course focused at gaming, but maybe you don't game at all, but you still want a nice future-proof powerful system based on AM5. And then you can even go quite a lot lower in terms of price. So this is a basic AM5 system just for general productivity. Still has an AMD Ryzen 5 7600, so still a powerful 6-core CPU, 12 threads. We went with 16 gigs memory now, DDR5 4800. Of course, this is a lot cheaper. It's only half of the memory and it's lower clocked. But also the price is just 45 bucks nowadays. So very, very affordable. GPU, well, the CPU has integrated graphics. So if you're just going for general productivity and you don't specifically do any GPU rendering or you don't do any gaming, then why would you pay for a GPU that you're not using? So then go with integrated graphics. Will not cost you a thing in addition to the cost of the CPU already. SSD, here we went with a 500 gig model of the previous example. And it's only $30 actually. Yes, SSDs are now that cheap. I think this was an offer on Amazon or something, so I'm not sure if it will always be this cheap. But right now you can get one of those SSDs for $30 on Amazon in US. Power supply, we still went with the same one. You could go even lower as you don't have integrated graphics. This is the lowest one in our own lineup, but from another brand you can get an even lower one if you want to. But at a certain point, it doesn't make that much difference in price anymore. And with the 550, it's still a very affordable power supply. You still have the option maybe to add a GPU later if you want to, or upgrade other things. And the case, we also went with the same one, so still at $49. And this brings the total to only $479 for what I think is a very nice PC for just general productivity. So not for gaming, but for productivity, it should be fine. Let me see. The story end says, I was looking at DDR3 memory kits last night, and not really that much cheaper than the DDR5 above. No. At a certain point, you get like a crossover point. So in the beginning, when DDR5 launched, DDR4 was a lot cheaper. At a certain point, DDR5 will go down, and at a certain point will dive under DDR4 prices. The same already happened before with DDR3 and DDR4. So DDR3 eventually got more expensive than DDR4 because DDR4 was the new mass production product and DDR3 became more niche. So yeah, DDR3 at this point per gigabyte will definitely be more expensive than DDR4, and maybe indeed even that DDR5 per gigabyte is already cheaper as well, because DDR3 is just not very common anymore. McKellen says, current iGPU is fairly weak. Will this board support 7700G when released? If AMD releases that, yeah, it's very likely that we will support it on this board. It all depends, of course, on the TDP that AMD will also put on that, whether or not it's a good combination, but maybe also a Ryzen 5 with a more powerful GPU. Yes, that's definitely expected to be supported on this board.
Gaming Junction BD. If I use ARC A770, then I need to change my 600 watt power supply, or is it okay? I think that's okay.
Should be okay. Of course, depends on the CPU you're going to combine with it, but with like the example that we're giving here, with the 7600, perfectly fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Dutch guy says, AM4 5800 X3D, solid CPU, and wait for the next generation. 5800 X3D is still a very good CPU, especially for gaming. Like for example, moving from a 5800 X3D to a Ryzen 5 7600 will not give you any better gaming performance. So it really depends on the CPU you're currently running, whether or not this is an upgrade or not, of course. But yeah, for this point, especially for gaming, 5800 X3D is still a very, very solid CPU. Okay, I think those were the questions for now. Ruudt, you've got some demonstration stuff to show us.
Yeah, maybe we can show the board first.
Yeah.
And well, the big thing about this board is, of course, hopefully the camera works. It's dead.
It's dead.
Hang on.
Can you
Maybe
wake it
that's
up?
me. I need to unlock it. Hang on, hang on.
Yes.
Yeah, can you try?
Ah, there we are.
Here we go. Okay, good. So the board looks naked. I think it was Alan who said that, and it is naked. And of course, the VRM part of the motherboard, that's something that get people worried sometimes, especially if you consider that it's an AM5 and can even drop in like a 7950X, which consumes roughly around 230 watts. Yeah, but like I said, this board limits the power to the CPU to 88 watts. So the 88 watts is the power limit, and it will not go above it. So if you add more voltage to it, it will just lower the current and the performance will drop. The elephant in the room is, of course, the VRM is not cooled at all. There's no heatsink on it, so it needs airflow. So how can you create airflow in your case? Well, the easiest way is to use the boxed cooler. So if you have a 7600 boxed cooler or boxed CPU, you will get this cooler with it. It's a very simple one. Just extruded aluminum and cut a slice of it and put a fan on it. It's a very simple working, and the way it works for the VRM is that it will blow. Oh, my orientation. Oh, okay. I cannot do that. Okay, sorry for that. Okay, so let me turn the board around. It might make it a bit easier. Anyway, so the air goes in here and it will flow out here. So it will just automatically blow air over the MOSFETs. Those are here, and they need some air to cool down because they get heated up when they need to convert the 12 volt to the voltage of the CPU. So if you have airflow with a top down cooler, that will work just fine. So that's our recommendation. Of course, we also talked about the other cooler, the Ruudt Prism, which is this one, and it basically works the same way. It even can fit right on the plastic bracket if I attach it, and also the air comes in here and blows out here. So there's always airflow around the MOSFETs that will get warmer. The worst case scenario you can think of, probably people think, is the water cooler. So if you have a water cooler, the block, I'm using this can also slot onto the cooler. There's no airflow here, but if you mount the radiator in the above position inside a case like that, doesn't zoom very well. Anyway, then the airflow from the fans on the radiator will create enough draft to pull air through the top, and it will still cool pretty good. The easiest way to make this VRM overheat is by using an open test bench. That's the way I usually test, and putting the fans of the radiator far away from the VRM. If I do that, then I can overheat it. It's no problem. Doesn't matter which CPU I use. It can be a Ryzen 9, a 7 or a 5, because all of them draw approximately the same amount of watts. The VRM will overheat. So if there's airflow, it won't overheat. If there's no airflow, it will get warmer, or warmer than people like, because we need to talk about what is overheating. Now, some people say, well, if it's above 90, it's overheating. Yeah, for humans, 90 degrees is something that's scorchingly hot. But for a MOSFET, this will start throttling, at least that's what I was told. At 125 watts, it will slow down the CPU because it gets too hot. So the MOSFETs can take some punishment. But of course, if we see temperatures above 100 degrees, we also think, okay, this might not be the ideal case, and it will age quicker than we wanted to. So the airflow is definitely a must. So I saw this VRM heat up to 113 degrees after a 1 hour Cinebench test with an air cooler where there's completely no airflow on the open test bench. But if I put it inside the case, the hottest I saw was about 101 degree centigrade, also after a 1 hour test. The arc coolers, of course, which are affordable, and I have to thank Matt de Vlieger from Cooler Master for this one. It's a white one, but you also have it in black and in metal color. The Cooler Master 212. It's been around forever, and it's been a go-to cooler for.
Can you show the bottom in the close-up cam?
The what? Sorry.
The bottom of the cooler, where it hits the CPU. The bottom part.
I don't understand what you.
The bottom part where it hits the CPU.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
On
yeah.
this
That's
camera?
right. Yeah. So there you also see the heat pipes in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a big difference, for example, compared to the boxed AMD cooler that you will find with the 7600.
Yeah, hang on.
That's just aluminum.
I'll put this down. But the
Prism also
has
has
that.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Stealth, that was just a block of aluminum, and this one has the copper heat pipes making contact and putting the air or putting the heat through the heat pipes to the hot end or the cold end, and it will dissipate the heat with the forced fan. This fan are simple, affordable, and silent. They work. They can even cool up to 150 watt CPU power. We've done that many times in the past, also on Intel and AMD. Not on AM5. This is the first one we used on AM5 because of the bracket. But there's one thing that most of the time you will mount it like this. Of course, you need to unscrew the plastic mounting bracket, but the air will come in here and it will blow out here. So usually there's a rear fan in the back of your case and the air will just have a tunnel here. So the airflow on the bottom near the PCB is nearly zero, so there's very limited airflow, and that will the VRM will get hotter, so it will go up to 95, 96 degrees inside this case. But if you have metal clips like this one, you can even lower it. That's not the best way to do it. If it's mounted to the CPU, it's much easier. But if you do it like this, it might look a bit funny because it's not centered towards the metal sheets, but it will generate more airflow near the PCB, near the VRM.
So maybe your
MOSFETs.
CPU temperatures may go a little bit up because you're not pushing as much air through the heatsink of the CPU
Actually,
cooler?
it doesn't matter. No.
No, it doesn't matter?
No, in my testing it didn't matter. And
But the VRM temperature, that will
lowered
benefit
by
a lot,
about
right?
20 degrees.
Yeah.
So the airflow is key. That's why I wanted this cooler, or at least a similar tower cooler, because this setup or any brand of cooler it has a similar setup like this. Like if it's the Noctua, the expensive ones, they don't really make the affordable ones. But for example, Be Quiet has them, Deep Cool has them. Any cooler brand has a setup similar to this, or even a smaller or cheaper one. But if the airflow is too high up, then it won't reach the VRM, and it will get warmer.
Jack
So-
Meow says there's going to be a problem with tall RAM. Is it now blocking?
For this one, it doesn't, because
No.
the heatsink width is not that
I think
long,
maybe you
so
can twist it a bit so you can see it in line with the DIMM slots.
the other
Yeah,
way around.
so-
Sorry, yeah,
yeah.
there's a cable in the way. Of course, I'm using the RGB Kingston Fury Beast. If you can find cheaper ones without RGB, I would go for that on this platform, but we didn't have the ones without. But it's a normal sized heatsink on it, and it can fit just fine. So there's no problem to it at all. So there's enough room here. It's not attached, but there's about 2 to 3 millimeters space between the.
Can you turn it a bit? Because I think the memory module, especially if you use even lower ones without RGB, they will still barely block the fan, right? I don't think it's
that's
even
true,
in front.
but if you can
Yeah.
see here, the air is not really
Yeah, and
impacted that much.
especially like the more budget DDR5 modules without RGB tend to be even lower.
Yeah, they are. So the air for the CPU, basically, if you buy similar coolers like this on a
So the
7600,
tower design. Yeah.
it's more than capable. So it has capacity to spare. So there's no really an issue if the airflow is high or low. The airflow, you can probably add more airflow to cool the VRM than for the CPU. So you might need to adjust the fan profile in the BIOS.
Jet Meow says, so they moved the RAM slots away from the socket. Well, what also helps here is that it's only 2 DIMM slots instead of 4.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you simply have a little bit more space left. And that helps with the clearance for the fan in this situation. Because if you would imagine one more DIMM slot towards the CPU socket, then you would be lacking space. But now for a 2 DIMM board, if the heatsink is not too big, like the Cooler Master is thin enough, then it fits. But yeah, it will depend per tower cooler. If you have one of those giant tower coolers, this may of course be different. But you're not very likely to use it in combination with this board, of course.
I will start building it, otherwise we cannot demo anything.
Yes. Going further on this story, Ruudt, because you did some testing, and I put this in a table, so maybe we can have a look at it together.
Yeah.
So you tested with 3 different CPUs, so the Ryzen 5 7600, the Ryzen 7 7700X, and the Ryzen 9 7950X. And this is all on this A620 motherboard. So also the Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 9 we of course put on this motherboard for testing purposes. And this is specifically to see what it does with the MOSFET temperature. So basically the power delivery circuit to the CPU, what the temperature does if you put in a different CPU and if you use a certain combination of case and cooler. So these were all tested inside the MAG Force M100R, so that's the case right there. And Ruudt tested 4 different coolers, so the Wraith Stealth, that's the one that comes bundled with the 7600. Ruudt only tested that one with the 7600 because simply the cooler is underpowered for the other CPUs, so then the CPU will thermal throttle and you're not actually measuring the MOSFET temperature anymore. So Ruudt, can you quickly show the... Oh, that's the one he's currently screwing on.
Yeah.
So that's the Wraith Stealth. And then there's the Wraith Prism. That's the one with the heat pipes Ruudt shown before and the RGB lighting. That's the one that also comes with the 7700 non-X and the 7900 non-X. He also tested the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Halo White, the one he just showed as well. That's a tower design cooler. So the first 2 are top flow coolers. That one is a tower design cooler. And he also tested our own MAG Core Liquid 240R, and that's of course the only one liquid cooler that's right here in front of Ruudt as well. So 4 different coolers and 4 different results.
I saw you made a copy-paste mistake, I guess. Or
I did.
not copy-paste, but the column from the second from the right,
Yeah.
that's the CPU, that's the MOS temperature. The right column is probably the CPU temperature.
Let me double check that for you.
Because the I can remember the stealth cooler.
Yes,
The CPU temperature is 95.
It's an CPU temperature. Let
know
me fix that for you.
AM5 CPU temperature, they say it's supposed to run 95 centigrade, but yeah.
There we go. No one saw that error, right?
No. There, it's fixed.
By the way,
so the stealth I would not recommend on any other CPU than the 7600.
yeah, basically they cannot cool another CPU. They don't have the cooling capacity.
Yeah, and it's already borderline for the 7600. So the Wraith Prism is much better than the stealth. Anyway.
So the Wraith Prism, you tested with all three of them, and there you see that actually the MOS temperature, even on the Ryzen 7 7900X, is still very, very good. On the 7950X, of course, that's a very demanding CPU. There you will see. You will go a bit higher. But yeah, still very, very decent performance there. With the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Halo White, you see that the MOSFET temperature is a bit higher, and that's essentially Ruudt because the airflow flows over the MOSFET instead of on, right?
Yeah, the airflow is a bit too high for with that cooler.
Like too elevated from the motherboard.
Yeah, yeah. So you create a tunnel that's basically from the intake in the front. There's 3 fans there, and the rear fan is also a bit higher up. So the airflow would not reach the PCB of the motherboard. Therefore, the MOSFETs don't get airflow and get a lot warmer.
Gaming Junction BD says, I have a request for MSI, please bring an affordable A620M motherboard with heatsink. We may do that, we're definitely looking into it as well, but of course it will make it a little bit more expensive. And it depends a bit on the situation, whether or not you will benefit from it. Because for Ryzen 9 7600, like you can see here, with if you use like the cooler that comes with it, or maybe upgrade to a Wraith Prism or something, still the MOSFET temperature is perfectly fine. But yeah, of course, if you want to go higher end, then it may be worth it. But keep in mind that if we would release it, of course, the motherboard will be a bit more expensive. So we wouldn't be able to reach this low price point when adding VRM heatsinks. But yeah, we definitely look into it to see if we can fit like a board in between this A620 board and our B650 ones.
And I think if you do that, then it will also open up more possibilities to put Ryzen 7 on it, or recommend Ryzen 7 on it. So,
but then of course the question is, if you buy a Ryzen 7, aren't you going for B650? Because that will also give you some more additional features.
Definitely, yeah.
So that's always a bit of the trade-off. Like, are you gonna release a relatively low-end motherboard with the heatsink, so it can run higher-end processors? But if people are not combining that motherboard with those high-end processors, what is your target group in the end?
Yeah.
So that's always a bit of the trade-off. So we're looking into it. Of course, we have to see how much cost would it add, what would the additional support be in terms of higher-end CPUs you'd be able to run. But in the end, that's something we have to look into in detail to see if the target group is big enough to release such a model. So Ruudt,
yeah,
how is it going with your system?
So far so good. I hope I plugged in the FP1 correctly.
In terms of VRM airflow, Ruudt already shown you a lot, of course. Here we defined it with good, fair, or good. So the most limited airflow is with the tower design cooler. But there is a big but here, and that is the all-in-one liquid cooler, because that very much depends on where you position it in your case, whether or not it will help to cool the MOSFETs. So in this situation, Ruudt top-mounted it.
Yep.
So Ruudt, maybe you can show in the case quickly where you mounted the...
Yeah, hang on, I'm going to plug in some parts, and then I will show the inside of the case. That will...
Oh, Alan JT says he's doing better than Eric.
I hope so.
Then the bar is not too high, is it?
Yeah, yeah. I hope I can do better than Eric, but everybody can make mistakes, of course. So if you, I have the case upside down, but this is the top of the case, and I mounted the radiator here. So there will be some draft here, or air coming in from the front and then also passing over and going out to the top and out to the back. I didn't point the camera on that yet. So there will be some airflow here, and that seemed to help. So I didn't measure airflow at all. I just watched the temperatures of the VRM and then decided, okay, this airflow seems to be good or bad. And we saw it with the tower cooler that that the airflow or the temperatures got a lot hotter, and it didn't matter which CPU we're putting in. So it's definitely the airflow part that makes it hotter. For now, I've put the Stealth in, and it's a top-down cooler, so it will generate some airflow here as well.
And this is the cooler that comes with the CPU if you would buy a boxed version as well.
And it's not ideal for keeping the CPU on a low temperature. It will just go to 95 with the all-core load. But in gaming, it's just fine. I mean, I'm not spending a lot of time in Cinebench in my leisure time. So yeah, it's not supposed to be a productivity or like a workstation. It's more like a gaming machine or a productivity machine. If you're in a Word or Excel or any productivity task, this will run fine. The cooler will run fine. It's just the all-core loads like the 3D rendering, video transcoding, any calculation, heavy stuff that might get the CPU warm, but not a problem according to AMD. So 95 is just fine. Also the 7950X, if you put a 360 water cooler on it, it will just go straight to 95. Yep. Intel doesn't go to 95, they go to 99. So that's the new reality. We have to deal with that. We have to get used to it. That's basically it.
Something more to note with this table is, of course, these were all tested inside the case.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, because it is the most logical scenario and most representative of how a person would use it at home. Not many people use an open test bench at home. But also note that in case you would, for example, use the all-in-one liquid cooler on an open test bench, that's like the total torture test, because you will not have any airflow on the MOSFETs. And then, of course, the CPUs will rise quickly. Yeah. But yeah, that's not something you will probably do at home. So most ideal situation is like a top flow cooler, like the Wraith Prism or something. It cools the CPU. Okay, it's not as powerful as an all-in-one liquid cooler, but it cools it fine, especially lower end Ryzen CPUs. And it also helps to cool the MOSFET quite a lot. So I would say that's about the sweet spot in combination with this motherboard. Let me see. Before we continue, let's maybe pick our first winner in the giveaway. So if you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/choose/insider. There you will find a link to our Gleam giveaway. Within Gleam, you can perform certain actions, and the more you perform, the bigger chance you'll have to win. Also, make sure, if you're a returning visitor, to claim your loyalty bonus. That will give you a slight edge in the giveaway. And then you will have a chance to win one of the Steam wallet codes that we're giving away today. And let me also pick our first winner for today. Ruudt, the honor is all yours.
Okay, that's Lucas Play.
Congratulations, Lucas Play. You won our first Steam wallet code. Congrats. So keep an eye out on your mailbox. Then we will email the code to you in the coming days with some instructions on how to redeem it. And make sure that if you're not signed up for the giveaway yet, to do so, because we will draw some more winners throughout the stream. Dutch guy says my 7800 X3D with a 360mm all-in-one does maximum of 65 degrees Celsius during gaming. Yeah, especially during gaming, it's like already the 7800 X3D is a very efficient CPU. Even more efficient than the non-X3D models. And in gaming workload, yeah, definitely the temperatures are expected to be quite low. Okay, it's now connecting the system. So this is running the Ryzen 5 7600 We have some more CPUs, so if we have time later on, we can demonstrate some more CPUs on this board.
I've created a very nice I/O shield from cardboard.
Yeah, we had an early engineering sample of the motherboard, so it didn't come with an I/O shield, because yeah, that's also something you're gonna miss out on with a more entry-level motherboard. You get the separate I/O shield like you also had in the past. It doesn't have the integrated I/O shield that you now see with the higher end motherboards. So keep that in mind. If you want an integrated I/O shield, this is not the motherboard for you.
Okay, let's turn it on.
It works.
At least the LEDs work, huh?
And there's some green in there as well.
Yeah, it's RGB. It's rainbow mode or something.
Can you push the button? There's an LED button on there,
yeah,
right?
I have
Ah, that's better.
this one.
Oh no, it still does green.
No, yellow, green. Oh, this cycling, I guess. This is green.
Perfect.
Purple?
Yeah.
Is it staying purple? Yeah, looks
Yeah,
like
this
it.
is staying purple.
Okay.
Nice.
Anyway, this one also has easy debug LEDs. Oh, it's already coming on. Okay.
Wet Girl says put it on green. Looks trippy as fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically it will become transparent in all the fan locations.
Yeah, and we have Windows, so that's successful. Yeah, also the network works. So yeah, here we go. Let me put it a little bit like that. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Then I can still see the monitor there. Okay. So let's open up HWinfo 64 first, and I can show you what's inside. We already told you, but then you have the overview. It's the Ryzen 5 7600 with a MSI PRO A620M-E motherboard. It's the Wise version 1.1, but there will be new updates coming soon. And it's using the Kingston Fury Beast DDR5 RGB, and it's running at 6000 and CAS latency 36, 2 times 16 gigabytes, and it's the RX. It says 7600 XT.
Did you pick the wrong graphics card?
Yeah, it could be. Is it really? I thought I had the 6650.
They
Yeah,
probably look the same.
Okay, sorry. That's the wrong one. Yeah, they look alike a lot. Anyway.
So Ruudt secretly upgraded the system.
Yeah. Didn't check it. Didn't really check it. I've been focusing on CPU and MOSFET temperatures so much and testing that part that I only just before the live stream I tested the first game. So well, the frames were high. That was definitely true. But okay.
But yeah, you can basically pop in any graphics card you like. Of course, make sure your case fits it.
Yeah. Maybe then the 550 is not even necessary for the 6650.
No,
could be
you
less.
still have some headroom.
I think 430, maybe that's a bit wide. Yeah, 450, yeah. 500 should be fine. Anyway,
yeah.
So this is the system. Also have a M480 1 terabyte SSD inside. We didn't have the M450, so yeah.
So there are cheaper options, but it's just what we had on hand.
Yeah. So we could run Cinebench and see what the performance does and what the temperatures do. So package power over here, and I can scroll to the power part of the CPU, and you can notice what's going on. The clock frequency. This is the CPU temperature, the temperature control CTL. That's monitored most, or it's an average. I'm not sure. There's so many sensors inside the CPU, but that's the one controlling the fans as well. The MOS temperature, that's the VRM temperature, the hottest part of that. And we also measured it with an infrared thermometer, and that's pretty accurate. It's the software sensor measured 113 at the highest without any airflow on an open test bench, and with the infrared we could go up to 111. So there might be some difference, but not more than 2 to 3 degrees, I would say. Let's run Cinebench, and let's set the minimum test duration. We can increase so we can see what it does in multiple runs. So you can see that the power is going up to 90 watts, and that can translate a lot easier to say. There's a lot of sensors inside the CPU, and also reporting power, about core power, SoC power, also some miscellaneous power. But this is the one, the package power tracking, that's the limit you can set normally in the BIOS, or in the precision boost overdrive setting of the BIOS. Well, this is an A620, so it doesn't really support overpowering or overclocking. So this one is hard or BIOS locked to 88 watts, which is the PPT limit of a 65 watt CPU. So if I put a 170 watt 7950X CPU in it, it will still run at the 88 watt PPT limit.
It will just cap it there.
So it will be limited, yeah. Definitely limited.
I see some comments in chat. Dutch guy said SoC 1.35 volt should be 1.3 max.
Yeah,
well,
this BIOS is not updated yet.
Yeah. But also the difference will be very small, right? It's like 2 watts difference for the SoC.
Yeah. I've been testing on a B650 Tomahawk. That one already has the newer BIOS that is also enforced by AMD to have the SoC lower than 1.3 volts and or up to 1.3 volts, and then it will list very similar to 1.295 something, and with the old BIOS it was 1346 or something, and if I can just trust this sensor, then the SoC power was just dropping by 2 watts. So yeah, not sure if that's really gonna do much in terms of temperature or aging of the silicon or whatever. So personally I don't think it's a big deal.
It looks like a minor difference indeed.
Yeah, but if you don't enable Expo or XMP, so running it at SPB timings, then it's running closer to 1 volts instead of 1.3. So yeah.
But still, also this motherboard, of course, will get the BIOS update as well that you just mentioned.
Yeah. There's another sensor that might be more accurate. Not sure. That's the SoC, and that's going also up to 1.37 volts. So this is integrated into the what they call I/O chip. There's also hardware monitoring chip, the Nuvoton, and not sure if that sensor is highly accurate or not, but it's a good indication, and you can see it's higher than AMD recommends at the moment. So we need to fix this in the BIOS, and there will be updates soon. At least that's what I've been told.
I see another question in Twitch chat. I have a question. My brother-in-law has the Artemis 273 CQR that he used with an Xbox. He tried connecting a Fire Stick last night with some films where there was no sound. How do you enable sound in it? I have the 32-inch version, but I can't see anything to do with sound, but mine go through speakers. Ruudt, do you know? Does it even have integrated speakers? I'm not sure.
No, I don't think it has
so.
speakers, but
I don't think that's part of the product.
No, but normally the HDMI audio can also output to the headphones or headset audio jacks, the analog ones.
Yeah.
But
I don't think there are speakers in that monitor.
No, but there might be sound settings inside the OSD where you can tell or you can set up where the audio goes from the HDMI.
So it's like an audio pass-through.
Yeah, because I think it also has a analog audio input, and that's automatically transferred to the side audio jacks for the headset.
But you can, of course, also connect speakers to that analog plug if you want to.
Yeah, speakers or
monitor
headset,
itself.
no problem. Yeah, as long as they have an amplifier in it, it should be fine. Yeah.
So that will be a way to still get audio.
Yeah, but it might require some setting as well. Yeah.
Gaming Junction BD says, what about room temperature? Climate control is currently set to 21 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, in my testing, the sheet you were seeing there, it's not very consistent because in the morning it's colder, in the afternoon it's warmer. But I measured the environment temperature, and it was between 19.5 degrees and 21 degrees. So, or 21.5 max, I would say. So there's a 2-degree window where I was testing. So it's not really fully climate controlled or very consistent. But I don't think the 2 degrees will matter that much if you're into the 80s or 90 degrees. So, but yes, if you say in the summer I don't have air conditioning and I'm in a warm climate and in my room it's 35 degrees, yes, that 15-degree difference will make your cooling work harder, of course. I must say that the table you saw there, the case fans are set to around 900 RPM, so that's quite low. They go up to about 1300 in max fan speed, but they were running about. The rear is a bit slower than the front, although they are. They were set the same with 7.2 volts because that's the default in the BIOS. The rear was about 840, 850 RPM, and the front was more like the 950, so they run a little bit higher. Maybe there's more drag in the back than there is in the front.
Ruudt, High Demon 79 is asking, does PBO and Auto OC use processor sensors or motherboard?
I'm not sure if I understand. The motherboard sets the limits or the bias, and PBO is increasing the limits, and then Auto OC will free up more frequency room, but then you usually get either thermally limited or voltage limited. So yes, there will be room to boost a little bit higher, but then the voltage needs to climb to a certain point, and then it will just consume too much power or overheat or whatever.
But like the thermal limit of the CPU will be defined by the sensor inside the CPU.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That will basically forward the temperature to the motherboard
temperature
as well.
is definitely inside the CPU. Yeah. But the power, normally, if you drop in an AM5 CPU, it doesn't matter if it's a X670E Godlike or it's a A620 we have here. If you put in a 65 watt CPU, it will be capped at 88 watt PPT. It's AMD's calculation. If you multiply the TDP value by 1.35, you will get the PPT limit that is applied by default. And the PBO is just increasing those limits or allowing the CPU to go beyond those limits. And that's where the extra performance comes from, but also the extra power draw. Yeah.
Mr. Mastox is asking, is there any performance difference with other boards? Yes, we will go into that in a second because we did some testing with this as well.
Good question. Yeah.
Sniper Wiper is asking, can he connect the soundbar to his monitor? Yeah, of course you can do that. Either, for example, through that analog connector, or another possibility is, for example, my soundbar at home has HDMI audio with pass-through. So if you connect your, in this case, Xbox to the soundbar and the HDMI pass-through to the monitor, that should also work. Of course, make sure that the soundbar supports the HDMI version that you need. That's something to keep in mind, but yes, you can definitely use a soundbar as well, in multiple different ways.
It's running for a while now. I guess it's up to 9 minutes, and you can clearly see that the CPU temperature is going up to 95. And
it just maxes out basically.
Yeah. So that's the max the CPU will run at. It's not thermally throttling in the sense of that the flag was tripped, but it's definitely holding this position as a balance, and it won't go higher because it will just clock down the CPU to achieve a stalemate on 95 degrees centigrade. As you can see, the MOS has increased to 73 or 74 degrees, and it will probably run this for as long as you can keep the room the same temperature. I've tested 10 minutes of Cinebench, and I've also tested 1 hour of Cinebench, and at around 10 minutes it's already achieving some kind of balance between heat output and cooling capacity, and then it won't rise much more than half or 1 degree. So I kept everything at 10 minutes Cinebench. Actually, it's Cinebench plus finishing the last pass, of course. That's how Cinebench works. Also tested Prime 95, AIDA stress test. Also, yeah, it didn't really matter. 7-zip I tested, handbrake, video transcoding. Everything seemed to max out at the same point. And also with the coolers is always 88 watts. I think the last part, oh, you can see that the power has also dropped, because before it was the package power is always a little bit higher than the PPT. It's usually at 90.1, 90.2, and here you can see it's already dropped to roughly 87. So it has already dropped 4 watts, meaning it was throttling, or at least it was slowing down the CPU a little bit to keep the 95 degrees centigrade.
And one way to solve it is basically put a ray prism in there instead, and then...
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So the box cooler is on the limit, like...
This box cooler is on the limit, yeah, so... but that's fine by AMD. AMD has got some flack about it when they introduced the 9750X and saying, okay, yeah, it's going up to 95 within a second, or no matter which cooler you use. And AMD said it's fine, it's the way it's supposed to work, and yeah, it's up to us to get used to that kind of temperature readings.
Let's head back to the question of Mr. Masterdox. Is there any performance difference with other boards? Because you did some nice testing with this using the MAG B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi.
Yeah. And
here I got those test results. So you tested 4 different CPUs: the Ryzen 5 7600, that's the one we're using now, Ryzen 7 7700X, the Ryzen 9 7950X, and the Ryzen 9 7950X3D. Of course, the bottom 2 being two very high-end CPUs. And here you can see what kind of performance difference you can expect when you're using like a more mid-range board or more entry-level board like the A620 we're using today. For the 7600, you actually see that the A620 scored marginally better than the B650. Yeah. It's 2%, but that's like within margin of error. So probably if you would test it 10 times, it would be like 5 times either way. So basically, it performs the exact same if you use it on a B650 Tomahawk or the PRO A620M-E. It doesn't matter in terms of performance with that CPU. So is it recommended to use this CPU in combination with this board? Yes, no problem at all. Yeah. Then Ryzen 7 79 or 7700 or Ryzen 7 7700X. So many sevens. Ryzen 7 7700X. This is of course a CPU, an X model CPU with a higher TDP, meaning it can also draw more power than the 7600 non-X. But because of the motherboard, the A620 motherboard, it is limited to 90 watts. On the B650 board, it had a package power of 145 watts. So you can see it can draw more power from that motherboard simply because the VRM is stronger. So we don't have to limit it like we have to do on the A620. Yeah. There you see that you lose a little bit of performance. So the A620, it's not that much. It's only 6.5%. We're a bit outside margin of error there. So that one is slightly bottlenecked by the motherboard, but still not as much. Yeah. So there you also see that actually the the sweet spot of that CPU is quite a bit below the power draw when you just let it go, basically. That's also why if you underclock it slightly, you barely lose any performance, but you will still get lower power consumption, lower temperatures.
Yeah. On the B650 you can also limit the power.
Indeed,
and then you will get better efficiency.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not a horrible combination to run a 7700X on the A620 motherboard. It's not the most logical combination either, because probably if you run a somewhat higher end processor, you want a somewhat higher end motherboard with more features as well. But you can run it okay, and especially if you fiddle around a bit with the settings, it shouldn't be much of an issue. Then the Ryzen 9 7950X, and this is basically the most power hungry AM5 CPU at this moment. It's a 16-core processor, and the X model is also slightly higher clocked than one of the CCDs of the X3D, making it slightly less efficient, slightly more power hungry. So if you would put this on a board with a very strong VRM like the B650 Tomahawk, it will draw 235 watts, and if you put it on the A620, of course the power limit kicks in, again 90 watt like the other CPUs, and there you see that you lose almost 25% performance. So I would definitely not recommend this combination. You will just, your CPU can be quite a lot faster on a different motherboard, so it's not a logical combination, but also not a good combination to run. So not recommended to run a Ryzen 9 7950X on the A620 M-E.
But it increases the efficiency a lot, because
the efficiency is very good.
The performance drops by 25% and the power drops more than 50%. So,
but on the other hand, you can also get that efficiency if you fiddle around with your settings and fine tune it on the B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. You can still get the maximum out of it, increase efficiency, and don't lose any performance.
Yeah. Also, the 7950 X3D is the more efficient CPU of those two.
Also, the power draw of that CPU is quite a bit lower on the B650 Tomahawk. So it's 154 watts compared to 235 watts. And because of that, you also see a smaller drop in terms of performance when you run this on the A620 M-E motherboard, because the gap is not as big in terms of package power in between those two. But it still loses 70.4%. So still, you do bottleneck that CPU quite a bit as well. So also not recommended to run this CPU on the PRO A620M-E.
The first question what will appear, of course, is what will the 7800 X3D do? And we expect it to do very similar to the 7700X. So we'll probably lose around 5% of performance, but it's a very expensive part to put on an A620, I would say.
It's not a logical combination. No. Usually if you get a CPU that is so expensive, you also go for a somewhat higher end motherboard.
Not only is the CPU expensive, if you go with X3D, you'll probably have money to spare for a high-end graphics card as well, otherwise you wouldn't go with the X3D, and then an A620 doesn't make sense.
So yeah, basically the 65 watt parts, of course, are all fully supported, no issues there. Where of course the Ryzen 5 is a more logical combination than a Ryzen 9, but you can still run a Ryzen 9 non-X.
I don't think there's a lot of people buying a 7900 non-X.
No, I don't think so either.
No, you can overclock it, of course, on a B650 or whatever, but
Mr. Mesterok says, if you would have a board with an A620 chipset but better power delivery, there would basically be no difference. Is it pure power delivery related? Like Cinebench performance, yes. No difference there. This is like specifically a CPU test. Certain other boards, for example, can achieve higher memory frequencies, have more layers in their PCB, all those kind of things. So there you can get a bit of a difference. But yeah, in theory, the CPU performance shouldn't matter. So if you get a more powerful power delivery circuit, it doesn't matter if you're running A620, B650, or X670. In terms of CPU performance, it should be the same.
Can we make an A620 gold-like? Yeah, we probably can, but it doesn't make sense. So,
And because of the other chipset limitations in terms of lanes and stuff, you wouldn't be able to get as many features on that board as you have now with X670.
Maybe a micro ADX godlike.
A micro ADX
that could
godlike. I think it will be a very small market for that. But
yeah, probably, yeah. But yeah, it's possible, but it doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Yeah. NRT says it's like shoving a Ferrari engine in a Fiat 500. Yeah, a little bit. Because basically the chassis of the Fiat 500 cannot handle all the power that the Ferrari engine has. So it will be limited in terms of what it can do in terms of cornering and speed, etc. It's the same here. So the CPU, in case of a Ryzen 9 7950X or X3D, the CPU can do more, but at a certain point we have to limit it because of the power delivery circuit. But that is, of course, it all comes down to price in the end, and by having a more limited VRM, we were able to get it down to $85 US. If you would put a better power delivery circuit on there or heat sinks, of course, price will go up, and you will go more towards the pricing that you know of B650 as well. Wardog has a question. Will the OCD work on any boards now? I know not all CPUs have the problem, but if the security settings work without cooking the AM5 CPUs.
No, I think he means the OCP, but...
Yeah, I think OCP indeed.
Yeah. OCD, that's what I have, but... but the overcurrent protection, we haven't heard any issue on an MSI board yet.
No.
So the cooking of the CPU, as they phrase it popularly in internet, is only a few pieces have done so, and also showing physical bulging of the substrate or the PCB where the CPU sits on and the I/O die sits on. That only happened a couple of times. So yeah, is it related to the overcurrent protection? I personally don't think that's the problem. The problem is that the CPU died before the massive current got drawn on the ASUS board. So at least if you're referring to the Gamers Nexus video, I think a lot of people will refer to that one, as they are only one of the few, or maybe the only ones, who were able to recreate the result of a CPU cracking and desoldering itself with temperatures over 200 degrees. So yeah, it is a weird issue, but we don't know what is causing it yet. So overcurrent protection, as far as we know, we have done all the protections needed to pass AMD's settings, and yeah, we haven't seen any failures, catastrophic failures yet. So yeah, time will tell. Time will tell.
Ruudt is asking in YouTube chat, will there be some A620 boards with 4 banks of RAM? Maybe, could be. We're definitely exploring what the possibilities are for more A620. Like, technically, it is definitely possible to have 4 DIMM on this as well. Of course, that's also something, it will increase price. So this board is really focused at achieving a low price point, so that's why you only get 2 DIMM slots. You get a limited VRM, all to achieve that $85 US. But yeah, it may definitely, technically it's possible, and you may see those boards in the future as well. But on the other hand, if you're buying an A620 board, you're probably only going with 2 memory modules, simply because of the price. So it's the vast majority of people also runs only 2 DIMM, and that also has to do with the higher frequencies that you can run using 2 DIMMs compared to 4 DIMMs. So even on a 4 DIMM board, in most situations, to most people, I would still recommend to run only 2 DIMMs. Only exception being if you really need the maximum system memory available. So for example, if you're doing a lot of rendering workloads that require a lot of RAM, in that situation I would only recommend to go with 4 memory modules. But especially for gamers and regular workloads, 2 DIMMs and higher frequency with tighter timings will give you better performance than more memory but slower. And that's always the trade-off you have to make if you're going for 4-DIMM compared to 2-DIMM. Before we continue, let's draw our next winner for the giveaway. If you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/2/insider, or if you're watching on Twitch or YouTube, you can also follow the link that the bot puts in the chat once every 5 minutes. If you have already signed up, there's no need to do anything, because you will automatically be enrolled in the next drawings as well. And then we have our next winner for a Steam Wallet code, and I know this person is in our chat. Ruudt, the honor is all yours again.
Mr. Masterdox.
Congratulations, Mr. Masterdox. You also won a Steam Wallet code, so keep an eye on your mailbox, then we will email it to you in the coming days. And I know you already won before, so I'm pretty sure you know how to redeem it, but you will still get the instructions, just to be sure. Congrats. Let's continue back to your system, Ruudt.
Yeah, I've put Formula 1, my favorite game for benchmarking. Why? Because it can loop it and has good result pages and stuff. Anyway, I can also script it, but I just put it on, I think a minute ago, but if you loop it, then it will generate a lot of heat. Because of the graphics card. As you can see, the graphics card is now drawing about 180 watts. And frames are, it's running at full HD, so 1080p ultra settings without ray tracing at the moment. The CPU is doing about 62, 63 watts. Also put the, oh, I'm in front of it. No, that's the wrong way, sorry. Let's do it like that. The motherboard temperature, the motherboard VRM temperature is over there. So you can also see that it's, yeah, with gaming it shouldn't be a problem. The CPU is drawing a lot less power than it was doing in the Cinebench test or Prime 95 or any full core load. Also you can see that the Ryzen 5 is only doing like 6% of maximum utility. It's over here, somewhere there. Yep.
So for gaming, perfectly fine in this configuration.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, this game might not be the heaviest on the graphics card at the moment, but the more frames or FPS you will output, usually more load will be pushed onto the CPU, and with 62 watts that's fine. I think it's hard to go over that number. Maybe Cyberpunk will draw a little bit more power, but it will probably cap out at 70 or 75 watts, I guess.
Robert S. Wilson is asking in YouTube chat, any problems with blowing up Ryzen 7 X3D CPUs like on ASUS motherboards? We already talked about this a little bit, but no, at this point we don't see any of those issues on our boards. AMD is still investigating the problem, so before we can be certain that we're not affected, we just have to wait what those results are. But at this point, we haven't seen it on any MSI boards, and we hope it stays that way, of course. But yeah, we also have to wait on AMD's conclusion about the root cause of the issue.
Yeah, the rumor is that the AGISA 1007 lowered more voltages than just the SoC voltage, and also they've reworked some of the protections as well. I believe it's a thermal protection. At least I read it on Igor's lab just before the live stream. So let's see, and yeah, if that will eradicate the issues we've seen on the internet so far.
Alan JT is asking, what overlay are you using for monitoring the system?
Yeah, that's my special sauce. I can send you, it's no problem. But it's done in Riva Tuner, not so much in Afterburner. Afterburner you can just click on the text and say, okay, I want this in the on overlay. But if you want to do this, there's a guide from the developer of Riva Tuner and Afterburner, and he made a small tutorial how to tweak it, and he also has some some demo you can use, and I just adjusted it a little bit. I didn't do that much. I just took the parts that I thought were interesting, and I just I made this as an example for HQ to implement in our software, but so far they haven't been able to do that. That's why the MSI logo is there as well. So I hope I could have convinced the software team. But so far, no luck. So the MOSFET temperature, the VRM temperature is going up to 70 now. So that's getting consistent, I guess. So that's fine with this setup. If you have other coolers or other cases, it will influence it. And of course, if you have set up the fan speeds in the front and the back, it will also be a little bit different. GPU is going up to 68 degrees, so that's also fine. That's I think the case is quite nice.
And at this point there is no top fan in the case. There are only 3 fans in the front and 1 in the rear. Also to bring down your MOSFET temps, it would definitely help to put a top fan in as well. That's also what we saw with the
water cooler.
Yeah, indeed, because you also basically drag the hot air there away.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something you could also do to lower the temperatures.
I can take out this CPU and put another CPU in and see what it does, and then you can see for yourself that it's capped at a certain power. I think that the gaming is fine. I let this run for as long as we were having lunch, so it's about 45 minutes, and then it was still running okay. So also temperatures were not getting higher than 75, so for the MOSFET. Which CPU do you want me to put in? I have the 7950X and I have the 7700X.
Yeah.
Sorry. You got 2?
So a Ryzen 9 and a Ryzen 7. Chat, what do you want? You guys can pick. How much do you want to torture the board?
Well, actually the torture, yes, it's a little different, but in 2 different. Let's first decide which CPU you will go with. Then we'll also have a cooler. We can choose a cooler.
Yeah, so the cooler options, well, this one is too limited for Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9, so we're not going to go with the Wraith Stealth.
No.
But you can pick between the Wraith Prism, you can get the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Halo White.
Yeah, this one.
Or we also have the all-in-one liquid cooler.
The water cooler is also an option, yeah. If I put the screws in on the back.
I see.
Yeah.
Currently the Ryzen 9 is in the lead. NRT says go all out. Dutch guy says 9, worst case CPU. Yes, definitely the hardest on the motherboard. Alan says Ryzen 7, more common option. Fair.
Yeah. The Ryzen 7 would be losing less performance, so it might be a more practical solution. But the Ryzen 9 is the top end, so you can see how much it gets limited. That's
good point by Mr. Mastrox. It's 90 watts, so what does it matter? Well, it makes a difference in the sense that one CPU gets bottlenecked a lot more than the other with those 90 watts. But indeed, in terms of power draw, it's the same.
There's another difference. The Ryzen 9 runs at a lower voltage, so a higher current. So there's a slightly more load on the VRM. The other thing that also is more strain on the Ryzen 9 is because it has 2 CCDs. So if you put 90 watts divided over 2 chips, it will not run as hot, so the fans will run slower, the CPU fan.
And the CPU will also be colder, right? I think that's
because
from
it's
your
colder,
testing.
the fan will run lower, so there will be less airflow on the VRM, so it actually...
Fair point as well. Yeah.
So, yeah. I think
a lot of variables.
yeah, exactly. But that's in that territory you will get when you choose a platform like this with a CPU that's maybe not ideal for it.
Mr. Masterworks, let's go Ryzen 7. I see. Let me see. We now have slightly more votes for the Ryzen 9. So last chance to get your votes in. You can still draw the Ryzen 7 over the line if you want. Verito says, what do you think? Will the Ryzen 9 7900 non-X work without major performance losses on those better A620 boards with VRM cooling, especially since it has lower power consumption even than a 7700X? It doesn't matter which A620 board, like all of them can run this at maximum, because it will be kept already by the CPU, basically.
Yeah, any board you'll throw the 7900 non-X on will run at 88 watts.
It will perform exactly the same on an X670E Godlike as on this A620 motherboard, the non-X, not
only
the X.
if you overclock it, you can make it draw more power and run faster.
Yeah. It looks like Ryzen 9 edged it out and got most votes.
Okay.
I'm sorry about the Ryzen 7 voters, but well, the good thing is with the Ryzen 7 you would see more similar behavior to the 7600. So you wouldn't lose as much performance.
And what cooler we're gonna use?
Yeah, so chat, there are 3 options. Do you want the AMD Wraith Prism? Do you want the Cooler Master Hyper 212, the white one? Or do you want the MAG Core Liquid 240R, only one liquid cooler? So Prism, Hyper, or Core Liquid?
Yeah, and the water cooler, the radiator is going into the top, otherwise I have to screw too much in front of it. Not gonna do that.
So I see a vote for the Hyper, I see a vote for the Prism. And I see a question from FRZ, I will answer in the meanwhile. Hello, sorry if I asked this in the stream before. I have an MAG B650M Tomahawk. I think that should be mortar or non-M Tomahawk.
Non-M Tomahawk, yeah.
I'm kind of scared to use my RAM on Expo mode. Do you have any info or guess on next BIOS update for AMD boards?
Just go with the BIOS 162 for the Tomahawk, and then the SoC voltage will be lower or up to 1.3, not over it. So it will not be 137 like this one. It will be 1.30 something, or 3.2 maybe, but it should be fine. It should be in line with what AMD is forcing us to do.
Okay, time to count some votes. So Hyper, Prism, AIO, so that's still all equal. Take the cooler for worst VRM temps, that will be a vote for the Hyper. White one to help the VRM temps. The white one doesn't help the VRM temps.
No, no. That it depends on how I put the fan.
Yeah, that's true.
If I put the fan low, then it will be okay. If I put it high, then you can see what it does with the VRM temps.
Yeah.
I can do both.
AIO, Prism.
Maybe this one is the most interesting because we have 2 setups, fan high, Hyper. Fan low.
Yeah, I think that one also won in terms of votes. So let's go with the Hyper.
Okay, do that. Yeah. Hopefully Matt will also like this.
But it was pretty mixed, the votes for this one as well. It's close.
Yeah, actually the cooling capacity for those coolers doesn't really matter because you're limited at 90 watts. So the CPU keeping cool is not an issue. The only variable is the VRM temperature. So
yeah.
First, let's
Britt abroad in the Philippines says, I live in a hot country, so AIO please. Maybe if you live in a hot country in this configuration, you might want to go for the top flow cooler because of the airflow in the VRM.
I think the top flow cooler is the easiest because you don't need to set up the fan profile because it will also always get enough flow there automatically. Of course, this one you can also do it like this and do it like that, but I will go with the regular way. So the intake here and blow it out.
Yeah.
You can also put the fan on the back and then pull it instead of push it. Yeah, I'm not
you can
sure
add a fan and get like a push-pull.
Yeah,
setup.
Those models are usually a little bit more expensive as well. So
that's true.
If you have 2 fans, it will just add cost, right?
For sure.
Okay, I'm first gonna connect the fan connector.
But often those dual fan models can be very silent because they can let the fan spin quite slow.
Yeah, but 2 fans usually make more noise than 1, so.
Depends if you run them very low. Like especially if you have like those dual towers with 2 fans that you run at a very low RPM.
And the good thing about this, all of these coolers, is that it will use either the plastic brackets of the socket, which comes installed on the motherboard by default, or it uses the screw bushes of the backplate of the AM4 or AM5.
So the existing backplate. So you don't need an additional one with the cooler. You can just screw this in the one that's already on the motherboard.
There are also some coolers that use their own backplates for AM4, but they might not be compatible with AM5. So this is a very flexible solution. I like it.
Scarface asking, why no VRM zone cooling? Basically price. We wanted to get this very affordable, so you could also get a more affordable AM5 build. And also in the configuration that we think it makes most sense with, and that's a cheaper CPU. You can run it fine without the VRM cooling. So this way we could get it down to $85 and it still, for example, runs the 7600 Ryzen 5 perfectly fine. So that's the reason. Anything
for the cheapest price?
Alan says, be quiet, TF will handle up to a 5900X easily, but that cooler will cost more than a motherboard. Yeah, that's also a thing. If you have like a high-end all-in-one liquid cooler, that will also be more expensive than the A620 motherboard that we're using now.
Yeah, that's why we recommend the 7600 with the boxed cooler, because that's cheap and it just works with this combination best in terms of price and affordability. Yeah, looks good, right?
Perfect.
But it's this one is not controlled by the controller. I should connect the pins
you connected it to the motherboard instead of the case?
I didn't connect it at all. So
okay.
Sorry about that. So it's not matching the colors of the case. Sorry. Of course, we need to go into the BIOS
for testing purposes. That shouldn't matter.
No. We swapped the CPU, so booting will be a little bit slower.
Maybe that's a good time to do another giveaway. So if you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/do/insider or follow the link that our bot will put in the Twitch and the YouTube chat once every 5 minutes. We're giving away Steam wallet codes. And our next winner for today is... The honor is all yours, Ruudt.
Simul86.
Simi, I think
Simi.
it says. Yeah,
oh,
Simi86.
Need to have new glasses.
Congratulations, you also won a Steam wallet code. So we will email it to you in the coming days with some instructions on how to redeem it. Congrats, and make sure to participate if you haven't done so yet. Dutch guy is asking, why are post times so long on the AM5 platform?
Especially if you clear the CMOS, or in this case swap the CPU, it's gonna be a very long time to boot. That's the AM5 way. Can it capture the BIOS? We didn't test it, right?
Oh, I think we have to swap cables then.
Hang on. I'm gonna unplug the display port.
There's a special trick for this, because of course we have 2 display outputs, one for the graphics card, or one for the monitor, one for the capture card, plugged into the graphics card both. And the BIOS will only show in one of them. So if it shows on the monitor,
yeah, it
you
should
guys
be
cannot
going
see
up to the capture one.
Let me make this a little bit bigger for you so you can read the BIOS.
Yeah, I can see, no problem. So this is clear CMOS. Yeah, okay, this is 7950X, BIOS 1.1. So if you want to buy this board, make sure you will have a newer BIOS than this one. But the keyboard's not working. Oh, right. That's my bad. The USB hub in this monitor does not work if the monitor is not outputting anything on the display.
And right now it's only outputting to the capture card.
Yeah, I unplugged it. It's a bit of a weird setting. I'm not sure if we can change that.
How is Jafar is asking, will the CPU melt down? No, definitely not.
No.
Actually, it's getting less power because of the power limits of the motherboard than what it would get on a higher end motherboard.
Okay. Hey, it's working. F6. So basically what I normally do, oh, the mouse, I also need a mouse. Or that's easier. Not completely necessary, but it's much easier. Here we go. Mouse. Yeah, mouse. So basically, most people just press F6, load BIOS defaults, press Expo or XMP, whatever memory you choose, press F10, save and exit. So if you want to see the overclocking settings, I can show you now as well. I can see, there are some overclocking settings like TDP control and PPT control. PPT is the power limit, and I can set it to manual and type in any number, maybe 1,000 or 10,000. I'm not sure if that's accepted by the BIOS, but it doesn't work at all. So no need to do that. Probably will be removed in future BIOSes. Maybe the more interesting part is how the fans are set up. So CPU fan, this is the custom fan profile. So if the CPU is not getting that hot, and I expect it not to get that hot, so the fan speeds will be lower. And
I'm in the way of the CPU temperature.
Yeah, that will hurt the MOS temperature. You can already see in BIOS it's drawing quite a bit of power because there's no power management enabled. And you can already see that the MOS is getting much higher than before. Also, this is the default for the system fans. It's running at 7.2 volts. I can set up a smart fan as well. So the system 2, that's the rear fan. If you want to control it, you can control it by voltage or by PWM, depending on what kind of fans you have. And you can just slide it whatever you want. You can also say, I want to let it trigger on MOS temperature. So the higher the MOS temperature, the higher the fan speeds. Not going to do that now because we want to just go with default, right? See what the temperatures do in this scenario.
I see a question in chat about the BIOS. Ruudt was asking, is there a difference between AMD overclocking options in the motherboard settings and between those in the OC tab?
Should not be different, no. This one has a limited part. The B650 and the X670 have much more options. And then I did see an AMD overclocking menu, and I think it's an MSI CPU or PBO configuration, something like that. And basically it has the same PPT limits and stuff like that. So yeah. But since it's an A620, it doesn't have that much control. So we can do press F10, and here you can see that I changed that is triggered to the MOS, but it's not smart. Okay, let's just change it back so we will have default. It shouldn't matter because it's fixed voltage, but anyway. So basically we only enabled Expo and that's it. Right?
Yeah. Okay. So now it will run at DDR5 6000,
yeah,
CL36 instead of the default JEDEC speed at 4800.
Yeah.
I think that's even CL40 as well, right?
With this kit, yeah, I think so. If you want to make, I forgot to show you. I showed it in an earlier video, but if you want, you can try to set the memory context restore option. If you set that to enabled, then the booting will go faster the second boot. So not the first one, it will still do the memory training.
Yeah.
Memory training takes a while, especially on AM5. And once it has trained it once, the next boot will be faster and every boot after that. So instead of waiting for 42 seconds, you will go to probably 17 seconds or 18 seconds for the BIOS. then still Windows has to load, of course.
For the memory training, it also matters what kind of memory you have installed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If you have more modules, it will take longer.
So you can try. If it doesn't work, if it blue screens, then you need to disable it again. Yeah. But that's one of the things I normally set up, but since we just go with the defaults, yeah.
Scarface says, all my motherboards are by MSI since Pentium 2 or 3. Nice, good to hear. I hope you're not still running a Pentium 4 then, but...
Why not? Pentium 4.
Now Scarface said, all my motherboards are by MSI since Pentium 2 or 3. But maybe there was only one board in between, I don't know.
Okay,
or maybe 10.
We're back. Okay, so let's see what we can do with the temperatures. So gaming will probably be very similar, but the all-core workloads that will draw the most power.
Hi, Demon79 is asking, is the memory voltage independent of the SoC voltage? I see 135 volt advertised on most kits. Yes, that's different.
As you can see, if Windows just booted and you start up a program like HW Info with the sensors, you can see that the power consumption is quite high in the beginning, and then it will start doing the power efficiency part. So the power management will kick in a little bit later, and that will also, sometimes people say, oh, when I just boot it up, I'm idle for like 1 or 2 seconds, and then it's already 67 degrees. Yeah, that's true, but because the power management is not active yet. Also the temperatures, it's already going up to 83, but we already saw that kind of temperatures in the BIOS, so that's very similar. So the first part of Windows and the BIOS means that the power management is not doing much, and the CPU is really inefficient and drawing a lot of power while
you do
doing nothing.
You do see it decrease quite a bit now as well,
yeah,
because now it's at 62.
Yeah, but we can quickly start it, then we don't have to wait this long.
Dutch guy is asking, why does it have to train the memory if Expo is enabled?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have no answer on that one, and I've never understood the training part that much. They say it's about signal stuff and voltage tuning. So there is some tuning going on. So the modules between the memory controller and the motherboard. So they will tune voltage and impedance a little bit. Not 100% sure how that works, but once that's set up, then the signals have the cleanest signal. And,
I believe it's more specific fine-tuning. Like Expo sets certain predefined settings by the memory vendor for voltage and your latencies or timings. Mm-hmm. But indeed, the memory training, to my knowledge, goes deeper than that.
No, training will also happen if you don't set XMP or
Expo.
Yeah. So.
But it's not like a preset thing. Like Expo is a preset thing. It's always identical.
Expo has only to do with speed.
Indeed.
The training part is about signal integrity.
Yeah.
That's something different. Yes, probably it might take longer to train like a very fast kit.
And not only speed, because Expo also does voltage, for example.
XMP does too.
Yeah, indeed. So it will set it, for example, for DDR5s mostly 135 volts instead of 1.2.
Yeah.
But that's, of course, because a higher voltage is needed as well to get those higher speeds and to get those tighter timings.
Yeah. Let's run this, sorry. Could have already done that. So as we were talking, it's running at a limit of 88 watts PPT, and that's exactly what it's doing. So the package power will go up to 90.1, 90.2, and that will do that forever. Since it's a 2 CCD part, CCD1, CCD2, that 90 watts divided by 2 CCD, so they won't get that hot because there's a big heat spreader on it, and this cooler is more than capable. So temperatures of the CPU will go into the, in this case, 48, so roughly around 50, I think it will end up. But you do see some spikes here. So once the load starts of the render, then the power, it doesn't show here, but I expect it to peak since the temperature rises quickly. Also, there's always a spike of the frequency as well. So, and then it starts throttling it down heavily. And I think that also makes the 7950X score lower in Cinebench than the 7950X3D, because it's not thrown down so roughly than the 7950X.
Yeah, so that's what you
Yeah.
also see here, that the
Yeah.
7950 on the B650 Tomahawk outperforms the X3D because the second CCD is clocked a little bit lower, and there of course it can draw more power as well. But where they are on the same power limit on the A620, there you see that the efficiency indeed kicks in, and then
Yeah.
the X3D is slightly better than the X in Cinebench.
Yeah, and also the X3D, the peaks of the temperature rising is not that high as with the 7950X. So in a very short time, it will just draw probably more power than allowed, or before the limit will kick in, and that will raise the temperature, and then it will just drop to a lower frequency, probably lower than the 7950X3D on average at least. That's why you see a higher score there.
Yeah, so here you see the multi-core score is 27.5K.
Oh, sorry. I said it wrong.
And for reference, on the MAG B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi, that's 37.5K. So that's 10,000 points more in Cinebench when running out without the power limits on the B650 motherboard compared to this one.
I made a mistake with the setting, sorry. It just did one run instead of 10 minutes. So that's my bad. Anyway, this part is the interesting part. So yes, you can see the package power go up to 90 something. And there will be dips a little bit, because then the first frame of the render is done and it will go on to the next one. Or yeah, it's always the same, but yeah. But it has those peaks, and those peaks will go lower, probably because the power management already kicks in quicker. But the CPU temperature is getting up to 50-ish, and you can see the MOS temperature is rising, and rising quite quickly.
And that's because of the dual CCD that the CPU temperature is so low, right? Because it's spreading out
so
much
the
more.
fan speeds, I can also show you here, is about 1100. Not sure exactly what the max was. Should be in my Excel file, but it's hidden, or not hidden, but maybe it's on the box. Fan speed 2050 is the maximum fan speed, so it's only running at almost half the RPM, so that's not helping the MOS. Also because, I'm not sure if I can show it like this, not really, I should put it more like this, because the air comes in here, then you have the tunnel passing here and then exiting here, because there's a rear fan here. So if I cannot do that. So this part of the PCB part is not cooled, because the airflow is more on this side than on this side. I hope that makes sense a little bit. So the temperatures are getting up to 86, and in my testing with the 10 minutes, it should get up to 95, 96, I guess.
Verito is asking, does the A620 still have eco mode? From what I remember, it had a limit of 105 watts, and here we have a lower power limit by default on those motherboards.
Now the eco mode had different settings as well. There's an eco mode, and that, yeah, it's 65 watt TDP setting. That's how it got the eco name. But in our other biases, like the B650 and the X670, you can also choose not only 65 but also 105 watt TDP, or just set it manually. But those were the preset, so you could lower the power and increase the efficiency. But 105 is basically the same setting as the 7700X has, and the 7600X as well. So CPU temperatures rose a little bit to 53 degrees, and MOS is already at 91.
And this is with the fan mounted the regular way?
The regular way, yeah. So away from the VRM, you could say, yeah.
So this is the least ideal situation for your VRM temperatures?
Yeah. Tower cooler just blowing way too high over the VRM, so not really creating any airflow near the MOSFET.
Let me see. How to participate for Steam giveaway. Go to msi.com/2/insider or follow the direct link in the chat.
Regarding the eco mode, like I said, I tried to set up the TDP and the PPT limits manually in this bias, but even lower than the 88 watts or the 65 watt TDP. But that also didn't work, so it seems to be that it's locked at this moment, so either by bias or probably by bias. And don't know if they're gonna remove those settings, because if they don't work, then just at least hide it or remove it or whatever.
Daymaker Access. The build is cool, though unfortunately my wallet can't afford it. Well, this is actually quite an affordable build, because we're demonstrating an $85 AM5 motherboard.
Yeah, there's always cheaper options.
Yeah.
So AM4 is still there.
AM4 is still, if you get like a very budget board, there you also have cheaper CPUs available.
Exactly, yeah.
So for example, Ryzen 3 CPUs.
Yeah, and yeah, for gamers mostly the graphics card will determine where you will go in terms of budget. Getting up to 95. Yep, there we go.
Still no smoke?
No. They assured me that 125, then it will start lowering the CPU speed. And we're not going to reach that in this setup, even with this cooler. I think you can go there if you put like Prime 95 and then put like a cardboard box over it, so there's absolutely no airflow there, with a water cooler and the radiator outside. I think you can do it, yeah. Maybe I'll do that.
And maybe tomorrow. A hair dryer on top. And,
yeah, hair dryer, yeah, that's a good idea. Do that tomorrow. Nah, no.
Yeah, so it's slowly still rising a bit, but nowhere close to the limit so far.
Yeah.
And we have a little over 2 minutes left.
Yep.
With this benchmark.
Yeah, usually around 10 minutes it will settle. Of course, we did one single run and then 10 minutes, so it heated up a little bit, but normally it doesn't matter that much.
Scarface says, I heard the fan speed should be different for front and rear fans. Can you explain? Well,
Because
in this,
you have 3.
yeah, it's 3
Yeah.
versus 1 in this situation.
Yeah.
It depends a bit on what your complete setup is. Like this case, for example, let me quickly go to... Here you see that you have 3 fans in the front and 1 in the rear. So the 3 fans are all intake. The 1 is the outtake. So everything you push in, of course, you will lose some through the ventilation holes as well.
Escape here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you, for example, put in 2 fans in the top as outtakes, then it's kind of 3 versus 3. So you can also lower your outtake fan speed compared to the front. So you can get more similar fan speeds. But yeah, if you have 3 in the front, 1 in the rear, you will usually have the fan speed of the rear fan higher than the 3 in the front.
You can also take out 2.
Also possible,
Also equal.
but depends on how much cooling you need.
If you have RGB, 3 is nice. But if there's no RGB inside, then yeah, usually one fan is more than enough in the front as well. The 3 is just for looks.
Yeah, it depends a bit on the hardware that you put in. If you put in very high-end hardware, of course it becomes a different story. You will need more airflow.
Yeah, but with higher-end hardware, you will also have like a water cooler with extra fans and stuff. Yeah, I don't think that the front fans do that much.
But like if you have a high-end graphics card and you don't have one lower down, it can make a bit of a difference.
Yeah, but if you remove the top 2, then you still have the airflow. Well, maybe the middle
But then
one.
your CPU temps will probably go up.
Yeah, I think the middle one is more interesting because this
Yeah.
will blow right into your power supply.
If you're going for one, I would definitely go for the middle position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because if you're doing one in the top, your GPU will get hotter. If you're doing one in the bottom, your CPU will get hotter.
Yeah, yeah. So it's done. It was 98 I just saw. Yeah, 98, top.
Yeah. And the max was 128.
128, what?
Was that the temperature when it throttles?
125 they say.
Oh, 125.
Yeah. So yeah, it was still 27 watts degrees away. Yeah.
Okay.
So if your room temperature is about 47, you would probably start seeing throttling. But you can still increase the fan speed. So
Welcome, the Neil guest.
Oh, by the way, if your room temperature is higher, your CPU temperature will go up and your fan speed of the CPU will go up as well. So yeah, and you can still tune the fan profile. Okay, let me lower the fan position on the Cooler Master Hyper 212 and then see what the temperature will do then. Okay.
RT says I have 2 up front and 1 in the rear for fans in the case. Yeah, that's quite okay.
Yeah.
It also depends a bit on the case size, of course, usually how many fans you have. This is a micro ATX and this one actually has 3120 still.
Yeah.
So that's quite nice, especially for a case this size.
But if you want to optimize, usually the people are on the front, right? So if you lower the front RPM to the lowest possible airflow and you have 3 of them, there's plenty of air coming in.
Yeah.
If you increase the fan speeds on the rear, normally it's towards the wall or whatever, so you won't hear it as much. So it will increase the airflow, the increased RPM on the back, and it doesn't give you that much noise either. So I think that's the best way to do it. That's why they say you need to do it different RPM front and rear. But that of course depends on the setup.
Yeah, it's a bit hard to see. Maybe you can see it a bit through the fans, but Ruudt is lowering the position of the fan on the tower cooler, and basically that causes the fan to blow air underneath the heatsink of that cooler. So basically you have like an elevated part. Ruudt is going to get the mobile camera to show you guys. Oh, I don't see your camera.
Ah, it's turned off. I don't have it connected, so okay.
We're gonna have to stick to this one. But basically you have like an elevated area, like a gap where you have the heat pipes elevating the heat sink, and there's like a gap underneath the actual where the heat pipes go to the CPU and the heatsink itself, and it will now blow air underneath, and that will help to cool the MOSFETs on the motherboard.
Yeah, normally you would mount the fan flush with the top metal plate. And now I've lowered it. It's about 2 to 2.5 centimeters.
Can you turn it a bit towards the camera? Then it's maybe a bit easier to see. Yeah, so you see you got like a centimeter or 2, I think?
2 to 2.5, I would say. Yeah. Yeah. So that's lower, and it can't go any lower because then it will, then it hits the screws that are bolted into the backplate of the
mounting mechanism.
Yeah, that's the mounting mechanism of the cooler. Yeah. And just those 2 centimeters should already improve the situation for the MOS.
NRT says with a dual fan tower you could have one low and one high. Yeah, you can. Most important is that the one in the front is then the low one, because if you have the one at the rear as the low one, that would still be on top of the MOSFETs. So you don't get the airflow towards the MOSFETs but still over it. So make sure to get the one at the front to be the low one. Uncle Ilya says, the more power your PC uses, the hotter the room will get. If you live in a hot climate with limited or no air conditioning, don't build high power PCs. Yeah, it depends on how well you can still cool them. Of course, temperature never helps for PCs. So if you're in a warmer climate, you will always have to take cooling more into account than when you're in a colder climate. But still, also people in a colder climate tend to heat their house. So, but maybe not as high as in certain really hot regions if you don't have air conditioning. If you get temperature like over 30 degrees Celsius and stuff indoors, that will definitely make a difference in your computer temperatures as well.
If you're in a hot climate, just put the PC outside while you're gaming, and then the keyboard, mouse, and monitor, just long cables to the inside. Then at least the heat will stay out, right?
But maybe you get like an intake air temperature of 40 degrees if it's really hot outside.
Yeah. Need a lot of fan.
Hi Demon79 says, warmer climate makes sweaty gamers. I think there's sweaty gamers all over the world, doesn't matter what climate it is.
Okay, let's fire it up again. Okay, minimum test duration, 10 minutes. Yeah, let's go. Here we go. Scroll down to the interesting part.
Jamada is asking, Twitch chat, quick question. Is it worth trying to overclock a 1050 Ti if you're running a Ryzen 7? Well, overclocking it will make it slightly faster. Depending on which Ryzen 7 it is, probably that one won't be the bottleneck. So it could give you a little bit more performance, yes. Because in most situations a Ryzen 7 is a bit higher end CPU than a 1050 Ti is a GPU. But it could be that in certain situations, you're, for example, VRAM bottlenecked, that you don't have sufficient VRAM in certain situations, then the overclock won't help you that much. So it's really specific on the situation. Ruudt Gubbe is asking, that's a strawberry in Swedish. What is better for gaming, a 7800X 3D or a 7900X 3D? Well, that's a good question. Like purely for gaming, I would say the 7800X 3D. It won't matter that much because the 7900X 3D has one CCD with 6 cores that are X3D, have the 3D V-cache. The 7800X 3D has 8 cores with 3D V-cache. So as soon as the game can utilize more than 6 cores, it will probably benefit from the 7800 X3D that has more X3D cores. But if the game doesn't, and quite many games don't use more than 6 cores when gaming, it shouldn't matter that much. So in most situations, performance will be really close, I expect. Of course, productivity, 7900 X3D will be significantly faster. In gaming, in most situations, will be close, but the 7800 X3D might edge it out in a couple of very specific situations. TGGF2004 is saying, hey guys, will a 13400F bottleneck a 4070 on 1440p? Depends a bit on the title. If it's an esports game, then maybe slightly. You could get slightly better performance with a higher single core performance CPU, but not much. And on, for example, more AAA titles and ray tracing on, it will not bottleneck it at all because it will be way more GPU limited and CPU limited. So yeah, no, a 13400F in most situations is perfectly fine with a 4070. I wouldn't worry about that at all. I think for many people that would actually be a nice combination for a gaming rig, for 1440p gaming. How do you overclock your CPU? Well, depends a bit on how you want to overclock. You can, for example, overclock through the multiplier. You can overclock through your base clock, but you also need the correct CPU and chipset in order to be able to overclock it. So, for example, AMD supports CPU overclocking on their X series and their B series, so not the A series, not the one that we're using today. For Intel, you would need a Z series chipset, so the B only supports overclocking on the memory, but not on the CPU. And one way around it, but it doesn't work with the 13th gen, but if you have a 12th gen CPU and a motherboard with an external clock generator, then you can overclock by increasing your base clock as well. So that's the thing. And that would also work, for example, on a B660 with an external clock generator. So even though the B series doesn't support, you have a lock multiplier that way, even if you put a K series CPU on. If you have the external clock generator and a 12th gen CPU, then you can fiddle around with your base clock. Question by Mr. Masterdox. Can we get more by undervolting, Ruudt?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Also the same question, or the same from Mr. Masterdox. Is curve optimizer still a thing? Yes, basically it's also undervolting. It's more like dynamic undervolting. But setting an offset undervolt or a curve optimized undervolt basically will run the CPU more efficiently, so you can squeeze out just a little bit more performance if you're thermally limited or power limited.
Of course, it depends on the CPU you're using. Like if you're running a Ryzen 9, you usually don't have as much undervolting headroom as what you would have with a Ryzen 5, for example. It would become unstable more easily in most situations. But yeah, you still can, but the range you will have available will be, of course, it also differs per exact CPU. So you can have two different Ryzen 9s that one you can undervolt quite a bit and the other one maybe not at all. But yeah, in theory, yes, you can. Ruudt, NRT is asking, isn't Curve Optimizer locked on A-series boards though?
I didn't see any Curve Optimizer or PBO settings at all in this BIOS. So,
yeah, I think on A-series indeed, because I think it's considered an overclock setting and AMD doesn't allow overclocking on A-series.
Normally in the B650 and X670E, the Curve Optimizer is part of the precision boost overdrive part of the BIOS, so that's in the overclocking section. So that's missing in this A620. So Curve Optimizer, no, but setting an offset, yes, that's possible. So the voltage V-core, just set an offset of maybe say 50 millivolts, or you can just experiment with that. The lower the voltage, the more frequency you might be able to squeeze out of your CPU. So it's technically not overclocking, it's just slightly undervolting. But since the power limit is still fixed, then you might be able to see a little bit of an increase in performance.
So MOS temperature currently at 92 degrees Celsius, 92.5.
I was expecting lower temperatures on the MOS.
Still it is so far a couple of degrees lower than what we saw previously.
Yeah.
Because at the end that one was 96?
98, yeah.
Or 98?
Yeah. It's settling now, but yeah.
It may still increase a bit, so a couple of degrees lower than if the fan is high.
Yeah, but in my earlier testing I saw it up to 84 to 87, so I never saw it over 90. And it's not hotter here than it was in my office, so not sure what happened. Still looks good, right? Fan speed's fine, yeah. Nothing blocked. Oh, I didn't have my magic I/O shield in, that's for sure. But
the custom made.
Yeah, not sure if that is gonna make any difference. It's definitely warmer than I expected, yeah. But that's with the tower cooler, you will get warmer MOSFET temperatures, yeah. That's definitely what we can see. What we can try is increase the fan speed on the rear and see if we can lower it that way, but don't know if we have time for that.
Yeah, I think we're going to close it off after this one.
Okay.
I see some people still want a Steam Wallet code giveaway. We will do one more giveaway at the end of the stream. So make sure to sign up if you haven't done so. Scarface asking, is it okay to use fan splitters if the motherboard has only two 4-pin connectors, 1 amp, and my 3 fans are 1.5 amp in total?
Yeah, I never look at that, and usually it's fine.
Yeah, like the
up to 3 fans, I've never had any issue.
But also the 1.5 amp is at maximum speed, and are you running all 3 of them at maximum speed? So will they even draw 1.5 amp?
I think those amps are also very, very safely put there. So probably the real consumption is a lot lower. And our 1 amp spec for the fan connector might also be very conservative. I'm not sure, but I've never had any issue.
Me neither. Not with 3 at least. No,
with
like
3, yeah.
If
12 centimeter fans, no problem. No.
If you're gonna do like dual fan on a 420 radiator and you have 8 fans on there and want to power them off a single hair, it may be different. But with 3 of them, I wouldn't worry too much.
No. I haven't had any issues so far. But usually it's like a water cooler and the fans don't run max all the time, no.
Bakuked is asking in Twitch chat, is it possible, the test is done by the way, 95.5 degrees Celsius. On
96.
Or 96.
It didn't really decrease that much than in my own testing.
Is it possible to upgrade your SSD without needing to remove the other parts?
Same.
In this situation, let me quickly pull up an image of the motherboard. One moment.
I'm gonna...
Like in this situation, the SSD slot, the M.2 slot, is located on top of the PCI Express slot. That means that if you put in a graphics card, it does not block the M.2 slot. So that makes it relatively easy, of course, depending on the cooler you take, if you can still properly access it. If you have like a very big cooler and a graphics card in, it may be quite narrow in between. It may become a bit harder. But for example, if you use an all-in-one liquid cooler, it will still be relatively easily accessible. And then you can definitely upgrade your SSD without having to remove other parts. But in order to be able to access it more easily, you can always just take out your graphics card. It's not too much effort usually. But you don't have to in all situations. NRT also says, but not much room with the tower cooler. Indeed, it very much depends on the cooler as well, how much space you have. Okay, I think we're gonna close it off for today, Ruudt.
Okay.
So let's maybe pick a final winner for today. So I hope you all signed up for the giveaway. And for next week, I think Ralph will have the live stream. I'm not sure who's joining him, but he's going to talk about the MAG Infinite S3 13th generation, which is a mid-range gaming desktop. He's going to show all the ins and outs, probably boot up a nice game on it as well. So make sure to join it. We'll be on the same channels, same time next week. And then we have our last winner for today, Ruudt.
Kowalski GMR.
I think that's gamer, right? Kowalski gamer?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Congratulations. You also won a Steam wallet code, so congrats again to all the winners. Keep an eye on your mailbox. We will email the codes to you in the coming days, and we hope you can buy a nice game on Steam with it. Thank you everyone for joining today. Make sure to tune in again next week, and have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and goodbye.
Goodbye.